I'm Victoria Whitman, and let me tell you a story. My story. It begins with a lie so quiet, so perfectly orchestrated, that I didn't even hear it happening. For years, I believed I had everything: a loving husband, a stable home, and a future I'd worked hard to build. But what I didn't realize was that the people closest to me weren't building that future with me. They were slowly writing me out of it. One forged signature, one manipulated will, one carefully timed betrayal. That's all it took for my world to unravel. But this isn't a story about loss, it's about waking up, about learning that silence doesn't mean consent and being erased doesn't mean you're gone. This is the story of how I was cast aside and how I chose not just to survive it, but to expose it piece by piece, name by name, because some names aren't meant to be forgotten. And mine was never theirs to erase. Chapter 1. The day he erased me. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He simply erased me like I'd never existed in his world. It started with silence. Deliberate, cruel, and deafening. Not a slammed door, not a shouted insult, just silence. And then the paper. The signature. The erasure. Claire Bennett had always been the kind of woman who paid attention to the small things. The way a person looked at you when you spoke, the pause in their voice when they lied. The sound of a key turning in a lock that had once welcomed you and now rejected you. On the morning she was erased, it was snowing gently outside their townhome in Lincoln Park, Chicago. She remembered because the snow was the only thing that seemed honest. Everything else, her marriage, her husband Nathan, even the coffee brewing on the stove, felt like props in a carefully staged betrayal. Nathan didn't hand her the papers. He left them on the counter. That was the first act of cowardice. The second came in the form of a voicemail. Not a call, just a cold, clipped message. Claire, out. The house is being transferred to my name. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Claire stared at the envelope. The bold lettering of the law firm, Peterson & Lowe, LLP, and a single phrase at the top of the document. Amendment to property title and power of attorney. Her name, her signature, both already there, but she had never signed it. She read it again and again. Her signature, in perfect cursive, replicated with eerie precision. The date, backdated 3 weeks prior. Notarized, sealed, her knees buckled slightly as she leaned against the kitchen island. Everything was happening too fast, but also too deliberately. It wasn't a sudden decision. This was a plan. A long, calculated plan. It wasn't just the house. That afternoon she drove to the credit union, only to find her name had been quietly removed from all joint accounts. The teller looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and professional distance. I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. We have documentation here showing you authorized the transfer last week. Claire blinked. I never signed anything. The woman hesitated, then whispered, This happens more than people think. You should talk to a lawyer. She should have been angry, furious even, but all Claire felt was this tightening sensation inside her chest. Not like a heart attack, more like grief collapsing in on itself. Nathan had always been charming, too charming. The kind of man who knew how to turn on empathy when needed and ice when convenient. Over the years, Claire had watched him transform from a soft-spoken law school graduate into a rising star in real estate acquisitions. Smooth talking, polished, discreet, and now clearly ruthless. What haunted her most wasn't just the betrayal, it was that he'd been preparing for this. The documents, the forged signature, the financial trails wiped clean. And yet, Nathan still hadn't changed the locks. That night, Claire stood in front of the townhouse door, keys trembling in her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just opened the door and stepped into the hollow shell of what had once been her life. Half the furniture was gone. So were the wedding photos. In their place, a minimalist coldness. No notes. No trace of her. except for one thing. On the hallway table sat a sleek manila folder, intentionally left behind. Inside, an unsigned prenup amendment and a scribbled post-it that read, "Let's keep this civil." And Claire didn't tear the note. She didn't throw the folder. She placed it back carefully, exactly where he had left it. Then she turned, locked the door behind her from the inside, and sat down in the silence. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. Michael Thompson hadn't heard from Victoria in years, not since her grandmother's funeral. But the moment he picked up the call and heard her voice, he knew something was wrong. There was a tremble she tried to hide, a steeliness underlined by desperation. "I'm coming to your office tomorrow," she said, "and I'm bringing every document I can find." Michael didn't press further. "I'll be here, bring everything." That night, Victoria barely slept. She sat cross-legged on Isabella's couch, sorting through a manila folder she'd taken from the apartment before she left. Bank statements, property papers, old letters from Eleanor, and one yellowed document tucked between two sheets of receipts. A notarized letter from Eleanor, dated nearly a year before her passing, stating her intent for all assets to go to Victoria. But something was off. In the official will Nathan had presented after the funeral, this letter wasn't included. Not even mentioned. Victoria's name had been listed as the secondary beneficiary, after a vague trust Nathan claimed Eleanor had set up. Morning came with no clarity but sharper resolve. Michael's office was in a restored brick building near Wacker Drive, nestled between corporate skyscrapers. As Victoria sat across from him, she placed each document on the table, explaining what little she knew. When Michael saw the letter, his eyes narrowed. "This wasn't part of the probate file Nathan submitted. If this letter is authentic, and I'm fairly certain it is, then we have a serious issue." Victoria leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "He forged something, didn't he?" Michael didn't nod, but his silence was enough. Back at Isabella's, Victoria began making a list. 1. Get access to Eleanor's original will file. 2. Verify authenticity of the notarized letter. 3. Investigate Nathan's property refinancing and signature trails. 4. Protect what remains of the inheritance. Isabella, who had once studied paralegal work before switching careers, looked over Victoria's notes and added, "You need eyes on the inside, someone who saw what Nathan did, a witness." Victoria paused. "There's Andrea. She worked at the bank. She knew our accounts. She still lives in Chicago?" "I think so," Victoria said. "She was always kind to me. Quiet, but smart. If anyone knows whether Nathan did something shady with the refinancing, it's her." Later that week, Victoria returned to the apartment while Nathan was away. She had 30 minutes. Just enough time to grab some clothes and search his desk. Inside the bottom drawer was a thin folder labeled Hale and Whitmore Financial Group. It wasn't the firm Nathan usually dealt with. Inside, a single printout of a wire transfer for $80,000, 0 cents, sent from the joint account to a newly opened LLC, one registered under the name Margaret L. McMillan. His mother. Victoria's pulse quickened. So it wasn't just Nathan, Margaret was involved. She snapped photos quickly, shoved the folder back, and left before Nathan's silver sedan pulled into the driveway. That night, she sat with Isabella and stared at the screen of her laptop. Her email was open, cursor blinking over a drafted message to Andrea. Subject line, "Do you remember me?" She hesitated, then hit send. The next morning, Victoria received a reply from Andrea. But it wasn't a message. It was a single sentence. "They came to my house last week. I can't talk here." Attached was a blurry photo. It showed Nathan standing at Andrea's door, and beside him, unmistakable in her pearl earrings and cold smile, was Margaret. ChatGPT Danoy. Why would Nathan risk everything to keep Victoria in the dark? And what exactly is his mother hiding behind that smile? How far would you go if the people you trusted most quietly erased you from your own life? If you think the worst is over, think again. Chapter 2 will reveal the paper trail that was never meant to be found. Chapter 2, the name on the paper. It wasn't just betrayal. It was paperwork, meticulous, deliberate, cold. My name wasn't missing by accident. It was erased by design. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Isabella's guest room, painting thin stripes across the hardwood floor. Victoria stared at her laptop, rereading Andrea's cryptic message over and over. They came to my house last week. I can't talk here. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. Nathan and Margaret, standing on Andrea's porch. Nathan speaking while Margaret looked past him, her face half-turned as if already surveying her next move. The woman who once handed Victoria a family heirloom necklace on her wedding day, now showing up unannounced at the home of a potential witness. Isabella leaned over her shoulder, frowning. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. This is about covering tracks. Victoria nodded. They're trying to shut her up before I even ask questions. That day, Victoria and Michael met again at his office. The air in the room was tenser than the last time. Michael had managed to retrieve a partial scan of the will Nathan had filed in probate. What he showed her made her breath catch. Her name was on it, but not where it should be. Instead of being the sole beneficiary, as Eleanor had verbally promised her for years, Victoria was listed as contingent. The primary recipient, a trust called the Whitmore Foundation, managed by, unsurprisingly, Nathan McMillan. Michael looked at her carefully. The foundation doesn't exist, not legally. At least not in any way that's traceable through public records. Victoria sat back. So, it's a shell, a fake, he nodded. A financial vessel, probably created to hold assets, move money, and make it harder for you to claim your rightful share. That afternoon, Victoria returned to the Glenellen property. The house Eleanor had left her. She hadn't been back since the funeral. The place was still sealed. Keys handed to her, weeks after Eleanor's death, but she hadn't had the courage to step inside, not until now. As she opened the door, the scent of lavender and old wood flooded her senses. Every photo, every book on the shelf felt like Eleanor was still there. She walked room to room until she stopped at the study, a room her grandmother always kept private. Inside a drawer of the old roll-top desk, she found a locked tin box. She didn't have the key. But she remembered something. When she was a teenager, Eleanor had once told her, if you ever truly need to know something, check inside the old Hemingway first. The bookshelf was still there, and inside a copy of A Farewell to Arms, she found a small brass key. The tin box creaked open. Inside, a flash drive, a handwritten letter, and a stamped envelope addressed to V. Anderson. For when the time is right, Victoria sat on the dusty rug and opened the letter. Everything I built was for you, my girl. If Nathan or anyone ever tries to twist that, use this. The files are encrypted, but Michael knows the password. Be careful who you trust. Even blood can bleed you dry. Her hands trembled. She hadn't just inherited money. She'd inherited a war. Just as she was about to close the box, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have gone back to that house. No name, no ID. Just a warning. Cold and clear. Victoria didn't answer the message. She deleted it, blocked the number, then stood in the middle of Eleanor's study until her breath slowed again. There was no time for fear. She slid the flash drive into her purse and locked the tin box again, returning it to the desk. As she stepped outside, the wind had shifted. Colder now. The neighborhood was quiet, but she still glanced over her shoulder twice before pulling away from the driveway. But thanks for waiting before. Back in the city, Michael stared at the flash drive she placed on his desk. Encrypted, huh? he muttered, rotating it between his fingers. "I'll need a few hours to run this in a secure offline system." Victoria handed him the letter. "Eleanor said you'd know the password." Michael unfolded the page slowly, his eyes scanning the spidery cursive. Then he smiled faintly. She never trusted easy, but when she did, it was absolute. He typed in a phrase and waited. After a moment, the drive opened. Inside were 3 folders: property transfers, Glen Ellen Bank wire logs, 2021 to 2023 video file, Eleanor_Victoria_Feb 2022, move. Michael opened the bank logs first. The spreadsheet was dense, but even a glance showed the irregularities. Small amounts siphoned monthly from the estate account, amounts large enough to raise questions but small enough to avoid alerts. Then came the larger transfers: $40,000, 0 cents to Whitmore Foundation Trust, $80,000, 0 cents to MLM Holdings, LLC, and another $55,000, 0 cents to an unnamed escrow account, all within the final 6 months before Eleanor's passing, all of them approved by Nathan's digital signature. Victoria stared at the screen. He started draining the estate before she even died. Michael nodded grimly. And no one caught it, because he made it look like asset consolidation before probate, a tactic, but one that only works if no one questions it. Victoria's voice hardened. "Well, I'm questioning it now. They opened the video last. The footage was dim but stable, a laptop camera. Eleanor sat in her study, a shawl over her shoulders, her voice low but clear. If you're watching this, Victoria, then I'm gone. And you're finally asking the questions I always knew you would." She paused, exhaling slowly. "Your Uncle Nathan is many things, charming, persuasive, but he does not believe in fairness. He believes in power. I once thought I could shape him into something better. I was wrong. He has already tried to push me to rewrite the will. I refused, and now I fear he will find another way." Eleanor's eyes welled, but her voice didn't waver. "Everything belongs to you. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are lying. Use this as your proof." The video ended. Victoria sat in silence, her heart thudding. There it was. Her grandmother's final truth, recorded months before her death, knowing exactly what was coming. Michael leaned back. This is gold in court. Not as a legal document, but as context. It proves Eleanor's intent, and that Nathan manipulated the situation. "But what if the will was changed after she died?" Victoria asked. "What if the document Nathan filed isn't even her final one?" Michael's expression darkened. "Then it's time to find out who signed it, and if that signature holds up." That evening, Victoria received a call from a blocked number. She let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice played back. "Miss Anderson, this is Andrea. I got your message. I don't know how long I can talk, but I know what Nathan did, and I know what Margaret asked me to cover up. If you want to meet, I'll be at the Wabash station tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Alone. As Victoria stared at her phone, a soft thud echoed from outside Isabella's apartment. She walked to the window. At the base of the steps, a manila envelope, no postage, no return address. Inside, a single page. A photocopy of a document had her last will and testament of Eleanor Whitmore, with Victoria Anderson's name scratched out in pen. Beneath it, written in block letters, "You were never meant to find this." Who sent Victoria the envelope, and how did they get a copy of a forged will no one was supposed to see? If even the dead can't rest in peace, how far will the living go to bury the truth? Stay with us as Chapter 3 unfolds, where hidden allies emerge and the quiet women they underestimated begin to strike back. Chapter 3. The Women He Underestimated. They say silence is safe, that quiet women don't fight back. Nathan Whitmore should have known better. Victoria arrived at Wabash Station 5 minutes before 9, heart pounding beneath her beige trench coat. The city moved around her. People hustling to trains, the sound of heels on concrete, the scent of coffee in the morning chill. but she felt like she was walking into something far colder than the Chicago air. She spotted a woman sitting alone on the far bench, head low beneath a knit beanie, fingers gripping a battered leather purse. The woman looked up just as Victoria approached. "Are you Andrea?" she asked. The woman nodded. Andrea looked older than Victoria expected, maybe late 40s, with stress etched into the lines of her face. Her eyes darted toward the street, as if expecting someone to follow. "I don't have long," Andrea said. "You said you were Eleanor's granddaughter." "I am." Andrea hesitated, then pulled out a folded envelope. "This is the notarized will she signed 3 months before she died, the one Nathan replaced." Victoria froze. "Are you saying the one filed in court was fake?" Andrea's lips tightened. "I didn't say that out loud." She handed over the envelope and stood. "I worked at the estate law firm Margaret used, Fielding and Kerr. She paid me to make the switch. I didn't know what it was at the time, not fully. By the time I realized it was too late." "Why are you helping me now?" Victoria asked. Andrea's voice trembled. "Because my son got sick, and Margaret offered to help pay his medical bills if I stayed quiet. But now she stopped answering my calls." She glanced over her shoulder. "They're dangerous, Victoria. Be careful who you trust, and whatever you do, never confront them alone." Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Victoria clutching the envelope with shaking hands. That afternoon, Isabella found Victoria pacing in the apartment, the documents spread across the kitchen island. "You look like you're about to burn the place down," Isabella said, setting down her tote bag. "I might," Victoria muttered. She recounted the meeting at the station, then handed Isabella the notarized document. Isabella read the opening line. "Eleanor's will, naming Victoria the sole beneficiary," and swore under her breath. "This is huge." "I need to do something," Victoria said, "not just sit here while they keep the house, the money, like I never existed." Isabella narrowed her eyes. "Then let's make them remember exactly who you are." That night, they worked in silence. Victoria pulled out her laptop, typing up a timeline of everything she'd uncovered, from the date Eleanor died to the altered will to the bank transfers to Andrea's statement. Isabella, sitting across the table, sifted through Margaret's old social media posts. A curated gallery of lies. Charity luncheons, estate fundraisers, glamorous holiday photos, all while the woman was orchestrating a quiet heist in pearls. "We need to find someone else on the inside," Victoria said. "Someone who knows where the rest of the paperwork might be." Isabella looked up. "Then you need to talk to Evelyn." Victoria blinked. "My old neighbor?" "She was Margaret's assistant for 10 years before they fell out. She knows more about that family than anyone." Victoria hesitated. Evelyn had always been kind, handing over cookies on snow days, complimenting her science fair ribbons. But they hadn't spoken in years. Isabella picked up her phone. "I'll text her now. She still walks her dog every morning past St. Paul's on Ashland." Victoria's pulse quickened. "Let's see if she still believes in telling the truth." The next morning, the sky over Chicago was steel gray, the kind that blanketed the city in a quiet sense of waiting. Victoria zipped up her coat and stepped out into the sharp breeze. Isabella walked beside her, carrying a thermos of coffee and the kind of confidence Victoria admired, the kind that said, "Let them come." They spotted Evelyn near the park across from St. Paul's. She looked smaller than Victoria remembered. Age will do that, but her posture remained upright, even regal. The leash in her hand tugged gently as her dachshund sniffed the grass. "Mrs. Callahan?" Victoria called softly. Evelyn turned. There was a flicker of recognition, and then, to Victoria's surprise, warmth. "My word, Victoria Anderson," Evelyn said. "I didn't expect to see you again. I was hoping to talk about your old employer." Evelyn's smile tightened. "You're not the first person to ask, but you might be the only one who deserves an answer." They walked together down the path. Isabella stayed back a few feet, pretending not to listen, but her ears were clearly tuned in. "I always liked your grandmother," Evelyn said, "and I'll tell you something she once told me. If they ever try to make you feel invisible, remind them what they see when they look in the mirror was once yours." Victoria swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. "Did you know about the will?" "I didn't see the exact document, but I do remember the day Eleanor came home from the hospital. Margaret was furious, said something about scrambling to fix the paperwork before the ink dried. I heard them arguing." Victoria's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. Evelyn continued. "She was terrified Eleanor would change her mind. And I think she did, quietly. Margaret tried to erase it, but someone always remembers." They reached the corner, and Evelyn paused. "Look in the attic at 412 East Monroe. That's where Margaret kept all the old files. She doesn't know I know, but I was the one who locked it after she moved out. I still have the spare key." She pressed a small silver key into Victoria's palm, then gently touched her cheek. "Don't let them tell your story for you." Back at Isabella's apartment, the two women laid out their plan. They would drive to Margaret's old house in Wicker Park, now supposedly vacant but still under the Whitmore family name. "I'll stay outside," Isabella said. "Keep watch. You have 30 minutes before someone notices anything." Victoria looked down at the key Evelyn had given her, resting against her palm like a weight she hadn't asked to carry, but now couldn't put down. The house looked like it hadn't been touched in months. The hedges were overgrown, one shutter hung crooked on the second floor, and the porch light flickered like it was trying to remember how to shine. They snuck in through the side door Evelyn mentioned, which creaked open with surprising ease. The attic stairs were narrow, almost vertical. Victoria climbed carefully, the flashlight in her phone guiding her. The air grew thick with dust, memory, and the kind of silence that feels like someone's watching. At the top, she found old trunks, broken picture frames, and stacks of legal boxes. She opened the first one. Bank statements, printouts, photocopies of property transfers. But something else caught her eye. A manila envelope, sealed and labeled confidential. Whitmore Trust, Amendment 3B, dated 4 months before Eleanor's death. Victoria opened it. Inside, correspondence between Margaret and a man named Alan McRae, a private investigator hired to follow Victoria in the months before Eleanor passed. Attached was a photo of her, Victoria, taken through a coffee shop window. A note scrawled at the bottom. "She doesn't suspect a thing. Proceed as planned." Her hands trembled. This wasn't just manipulation, it was surveillance. It was premeditated erasure. Footsteps creaked from the floor below. Victoria froze. Isabella wasn't supposed to come up. Someone else was in the house. ChatGPT Denoy? Who hired a private investigator to track Victoria? And what else did they uncover before Eleanor's death? If your own family watched you like a suspect, would you ever feel safe again? Don't miss Chapter 4, where locked doors open, buried evidence rises, and the truth begins to breathe. Chapter 4. The Witness Who Turned Back. Sometimes the person you need the most is the one too terrified to speak, until silence becomes more dangerous than truth. The attic door slammed shut behind her like a trap, but when Victoria spun around, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a woman in her early 30s clutching the railing, pale and trembling. The name slipped from Victoria's lips before she could stop it. "Andrea?" The woman stepped into the narrow light beam of Victoria's phone, her voice low, urgent. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same to you." Andrea Vaughn, the former assistant branch manager at Calton Savings and Loan, the woman who'd mysteriously resigned 2 weeks after Eleanor's death and vanished from the financial world, was standing in her family's attic. And the fear in her eyes told Victoria everything she needed to know. "How long have you been working with them?" Victoria asked. I wasn't working with them, Andrea whispered. I was used. They sat on the floor, knees brushing against old filing boxes. The air was thick with insulation dust and the must of old lies. Andrea took a breath. I handled some of the paperwork for the trust amendment Eleanor filed. Margaret came to the bank a week later, said she was Eleanor's power of attorney. That part was true, but the signature she had on the updated trust, it wasn't what I filed. Victoria felt the chill even before the wind pushed through the attic vent. You're saying she forged it? I didn't realize until it was too late. They moved fast, cleaned it all up. The paper trail was buried. I was told to keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my license, but I started seeing things. Someone followed me home. My mailbox was broken into. I panicked. I quit. Disappeared. Victoria leaned forward. But you're here now, Andrea nodded slowly. I came back to retrieve my copy. I'd hidden a scanned version of the original trust on a flash drive, just in case. It's buried beneath a loose floorboard behind the linen closet, but I didn't expect you. You need to testify, Victoria said, steady and clear. Andrea shook her head. I can't. Margaret's reach is longer than you think. If I come forward— You won't be alone, Victoria interrupted. You think I have anything left to lose? Silence stretched between them. Then Andrea's eyes darted to the attic door. Come on, if they see my car parked out front, they'll know someone talked. Back at Isabella's apartment, the tension was sharp. Andrea sat curled on the couch with a blanket while Victoria paced. Isabella handed over a cup of tea but didn't sugarcoat the reality. If we go public with this, we need more than a verbal confession. We need that flash drive. Andrea nodded. We'll have to go back tomorrow night. The house is being cleared for estate sale staging in 3 days. After that, access will be impossible. That night, Victoria lay awake, the ceiling above, her blurred into memories. Margaret's tight-lipped smiles, Nathan's silences, and Eleanor's trembling hand that last Christmas. Had her grandmother tried to protect her? Had she known Margaret would come for what wasn't hers? Victoria didn't cry. Not this time. Anger had replaced grief. Purpose had overtaken paralysis. She sat up, grabbed her notebook, and started writing down everything. Dates, names, inconsistencies, what Evelyn said, what Andrea admitted. The outline of a case was forming. Slowly, carefully. They weren't just going to reclaim her name. They were going to make sure it never got erased again. Victoria stared at the message, her breath caught, somewhere between fear and fury. She's lying to you. No name, no number. Sent through an encrypted app that deleted the message as soon as she clicked away. She turned the phone in her hands, mind racing. Who would send that? Someone trying to scare her off? Someone trying to protect her? Or someone closer? Someone watching too closely. The next morning, Andrea was waiting in the cafe across from the old Whitmore house, dressed in a gray hoodie and glasses. Her hand shook slightly as she sipped her coffee, eyes darting to the street every few seconds. I didn't sleep, she confessed. Someone sent me a message last night, Victoria said bluntly. Anonymous. Said you were lying. Andrea went still. I'm not, I swear to you. I want to believe that, Victoria said, but we have to be sure. Andrea swallowed, then opened her bag and pulled out an old phone. This was my work phone from Kelton. I saved every email, every message from Margaret, just in case. Victoria took the phone, heart pounding. There, archived and untouched, were dozens of flagged messages, some of them detailing routine adjustments. Others far more chilling. Make sure nothing links back to Eleanor's original paperwork. Scrub the logs. Once the trust reads clean, we'll proceed with the new executor paperwork. And one that stopped Victoria cold. Get Vaughn out quietly. She knows too much. That night, under the cover of dusk, they parked behind the estate and entered through the back utility door, which Andrea still had a key for. remnant of a repair job she'd overseen months before. The house was hollow, like a shell of itself, furniture covered in white sheets, chandeliers wrapped in plastic. Eleanor's legacy erased, one staging instruction at a time. Andrea led the way up the servants' stairwell, each step creaking with memories. In the hallway behind the linen closet, she pried up a loose floorboard and reached into the darkness. Her hand emerged with a flash drive, taped inside a plastic case. "This is it," she whispered. "The original trust file, signed, dated, with witness statements. Before they altered anything." Suddenly, a thud echoed from downstairs. Both women froze. Victoria gestured for silence and stepped lightly toward the top of the stairs. She saw shadows moving in the foyer. 2 figures, both male, one holding a flashlight. Andrea mouthed, "We have to go." They slipped back down through the rear staircase and out the side garden gate, hearts hammering in their throats. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. Inside, breathless, Victoria turned to Andrea. "Was that Margaret's doing?" Andrea's voice was shaking. "She told me it wasn't. This family buries problems, not solves them. I think we just became a problem again." Back in Isabella's, they plugged in the drive. The document opened slowly, revealing Eleanor's unaltered intent. Victoria as the sole heir. No mention of Nathan, no contingent clauses, and there was something else. Eleanor's personal note, digitally scanned and appended to the file. It read, "To my dearest Victoria," if you're reading this, it means they tried to silence what was yours. "Fight smart, fight quietly. You were always the only one who saw things clearly." Victoria read it again. And again. She wasn't just reclaiming a fortune. She was reclaiming her identity. Later that night, as Isabella made tea and Andrea finally slept on the couch, Victoria stepped outside to the fire escape. The city buzzed beneath her, and she realized, for the first time in months, she wasn't alone. Not in her anger, not in her grief, not in this fight. She had allies now, and evidence, and a name they could no longer erase. Just as Victoria turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was a photo. A grainy surveillance shot of her, Andrea, and Isabella, taken outside the cafe that morning. Captioned with one word, "ticking." Who was watching them so closely, and what kind of clock had just started ticking against Victoria? If your every step was being tracked, would you still dare to uncover the truth that others would kill to bury? Don't miss Chapter 5, where old walls speak, secrets buried in the house resurface, and the past demands to be heard. Chapter 5, The Room He Never Locked. He always made sure every door in the estate was locked, except the one he never thought she'd be brave enough to enter. Victoria hadn't been back to the Whitmore estate alone since the night she and Andrea fled into the dark with the flash drive. But now, just past midnight, she stood at the edge of the east garden with a crowbar in one hand, and Eleanor's words echoing in her mind. Fight smart. Fight quietly. She wasn't breaking in for revenge. She was breaking in for answers. The side door to the old carriage house, converted into Gregory's private study years ago, was rusted shut, but never alarmed. No one had needed to secure it. No one ever entered but him. But tonight, someone would. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of dust, cigar smoke, and polished wood. Books lined every wall, leather-bound and untouched. A mahogany desk stood like a monument to secrecy in the center of the room. She knew Gregory had never let anyone, not even Margaret, look through his personal files. His study was where deals were made, secrets were brokered, and, Victoria now suspected, truth was buried. She moved quickly, methodically. Top drawer, locked. She popped it with the crowbar, nothing but old ledgers and worn pens. The second drawer, deeper, yielded more. Stacks of manila folders, each marked with a year. She flipped to 2020. Inside, property appraisals, account ledgers, and a list of charitable donations that never matched Eleanor's known statements. Then her fingers stopped. One file thicker, sealed in a red envelope, was labeled Contingency, Eleanor A. Whitmore, Carthage. She tore it open. It wasn't just a contingency file, it was a record of alterations. Victoria's name had been systematically erased from early drafts of the trust documents, with notes in the margins suggesting the legal strategies used to void her status as heir. Even worse, there were memos addressed to a name she hadn't seen before. Lewis Harper, family legal retainer. A man she now suspected was the orchestrator behind the revisions. A separate sheet listed a payment to A. Russo with a note, processing, urgent transfer post, Eleanor. Andrea Russo. Her stomach turned. Did they pay her off, or was she being threatened? Then a small photograph fell from the file. A young Victoria, no older than 7, standing beside Eleanor in the garden. A red circle had been drawn around Eleanor's hand, resting protectively on Victoria's shoulder, with a scribbled caption, "Sentimental weakness. This will not stand in court." Victoria gripped the edge of the desk. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated erasure. She searched further. Behind the bookcase was a locked wall safe. She hesitated, then used a trick Andrea had taught her, UV powder and a small pocket torch. The smudges revealed a 4-digit combination. The year Eleanor founded Whitmore and Blythe. It clicked open. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Gregory's. The first few entries were business, mundane. But deeper in, the tone shifted. "She's changed the trust again. Says Victoria deserves the truth. If that girl finds out, the balance tips. Margaret won't stand for it. Neither will I. I've told Harper to bury the original file. Keep the girl under financial review. She'll crack eventually." Victoria sat back, unable to breathe. So much of what had happened to her wasn't just emotional neglect. It was deliberate manipulation, a strategy formed behind cigar smoke and silence. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She froze, then heard it again. She closed the safe, tucked the journal into her coat, and blew out the lamp. Whoever was upstairs, security, Gregory, or worse, she couldn't be caught now. She backed out into the garden and disappeared into the trees before headlights swept over the estate's front drive. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She sat on Isabella's porch in Charleston, the leather journal open in her lap and a second cup of cold coffee untouched beside her. Pages fluttered in the humid breeze, each one filled with Gregory Whitmore's careful handwriting. Calculations, manipulations, and rehearsed lies. By 4 a.m., she had mapped out what she needed. She circled 3 names in her notebook. Lewis Harper, Gregory's legal bulldog. Andrea Russo, the unwilling participant who held the truth. Nina Foster, the notary who signed the amended trust 5 days before Eleanor died. They were the trinity behind her erasure, and at least one of them had to crack. By mid-morning, Victoria was in Columbia, walking up the steps of an old law office tucked beside a shuttered antique shop. The brass plaque on the door read, "Harper and Blackwell, LLP." The receptionist looked up, startled, when she stepped inside. "I need to speak with Mr. Harper," she said, tone firm, voice calm. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have this." She laid Gregory's journal on the counter, open to the page where Harper's name was listed. Beside the phrase, "File Suppression Victoria," the receptionist blinked. "One moment." Minutes later, Victoria was ushered into a cold, windowless conference room. Harper entered slowly, balding, sharp-suited, with the composure of a man who hadn't been caught off guard in 20 years. "Miss Anderson," he said coolly, "to what do I owe this unexpected drop-in?" "Victoria, I know you helped Gregory bury the original trust. I know Andrea Russo was paid off. I know my name was removed from the documents before Eleanor died, and I know that's illegal." Harper smiled like a man amused at a child pretending to know law. "Those are strong accusations," he said. "I don't need accusations," she said, pulling out her phone. "I have copies." She played the audio recording from Andrea the night before. The sound was scratchy but clear. "They pressured me, paid me through a shell company. They said if I didn't notarize the changes, I'd lose my license, maybe worse." Harper's face didn't change, but his fingers curled against the table. Victoria leaned forward. "This is your chance to walk away clean. Help me bring the truth forward, or I promise you I'll bring every journalist in the state to your front lawn." The silence stretched long, then Harper chuckled. "You sound a lot like Eleanor." That wasn't a compliment, but it felt like a victory. That night, back at Isabella's, Victoria sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by open folders. Harper hadn't confessed, but he had slipped a name, a code, a shipment. Enough to confirm that one document remained: the original trust, signed and hidden. According to Harper's half-uttered words, it had been placed in a legacy vault, rented under a shell entity in Savannah. It was time to go. She arrived at the small security firm the next day, posing as an estate administrator with forged ID and just enough charm. The receptionist hesitated, then led her to a private room. Inside was a lockbox, aged and dust-covered, tagged under the name E.A. Whitmore Legacy Trust. Victoria's hands trembled as she turned the key Harper had mentioned. Inside, one blue folder, wrapped in wax-sealed twine. She opened it. There it was. The original trust. Eleanor's signature intact. Victoria's name restored as primary beneficiary. Dated 3 weeks before Eleanor's death. She exhaled, then froze. Beneath the trust was a photograph. A much younger Gregory standing beside a man she didn't recognize, tall, clean-cut, mid-30s, shaking hands at the steps of the old Whitmore estate. On the back, scrawled in Eleanor's sharp cursive, Nathan Hale. Her father's mistake, her true blood. Victoria's pulse stopped. Nathan Hale? She had never heard the name. But it wasn't Gregory, and that meant everything. She sat on the floor of the vault, trust papers in one hand, photograph in the other, her whole life unraveling. Because the man who raised her wasn't her father, and the man in the photograph might still be alive. Who is Nathan Hale, and why did Eleanor call him Victoria's true blood in a vault no one was ever meant to open? If your entire identity was built on a lie, would you have the strength to rebuild it from the ashes of the truth? Join us in Chapter 6, where family, legacy, and vengeance collide, and the woman they tried to erase reclaims her name. Chapter 6. The house that stands. It's strange how a house can hold its breath, as if it knows its secrets are about to be dragged into the light. The courtroom was cold, but not from the air conditioning. It was the kind of cold that clung to your skin, that seeped into your bones when truth met consequence. Victoria sat still at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly, her pearl bracelet from Eleanor glinting under the sterile lighting. A ghost of old wealth, old blood, and older lies. Across from her, Nathan and Margaret looked unnerved for the first time. Their composure, once airtight, had started to unravel, thread by thread. Margaret whispered furiously into her attorney's ear, while Nathan's jaw clenched with every name mentioned. Eleanor's, Victoria's. Nathan Hale's. Mark rose, calm as ever, and began presenting the forensic evidence. Signatures compared, timestamps dissected, a trail of forged amendments and erased clauses. The room seemed to contract with every word. Exhibit 34B, Mark said, holding up the original will. This document was recovered from a sealed vault at Eleanor Hale's residence. It is dated and notarized with explicit instructions that the Hale estate be transferred to Victoria Whitman, her biological granddaughter. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the documents with a surgical gaze. "And this contradicts the version currently executed by Mr. Whitman and Mrs. Whitman?" "Not contradicts, Your Honor," Mark said. "Supersedes. The fraudulent version removed Victoria entirely and reallocated the assets to Nathan Whitman and his mother." There it was. Clean, devastating, undeniable. But what shook Victoria most wasn't the revelation. It was the silence that followed. Margaret's silence. Nathan's refusal to meet her eyes. It was the sound of a family name quietly imploding without anyone daring to scream. As court recessed for a break, Isabella squeezed Victoria's hand. "You're doing it," she whispered. "You're standing your ground." Victoria managed a nod, though her pulse was roaring. She looked over her shoulder. Not at Nathan, not at Margaret, but at the gallery. Rows of strangers, reporters, and behind them, a face she hadn't expected. Michael. He gave her the smallest nod. Permission, pride, maybe even peace. Later that evening, the final ruling came down. The court ruled in favor of Victoria Whitman. The forged will was deemed null. The estate, per Eleanor's original document, would revert to Victoria, including the Hale family home, the remaining financial assets, and public restitution for damages done. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Questions flew like bullets. "Victoria, how does it feel to win? Were you aware of your biological connection to Eleanor before this trial? Will you press charges?" She didn't answer them all, but she did say one thing. "I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for truth, and the house she built, the legacy she left, is finally standing again." She walked away, heels clicking against the concrete like punctuation marks to a story too long buried. But as she reached the car, a voice stopped her. A woman, mid-30s, brown coat, dark glasses, stepped forward and handed her a small envelope. "Miss Whitman," she said, and then, "She wanted you to have this, from Eleanor." Victoria blinked, frozen in place. The envelope had no return address, just her name, handwritten in Eleanor's delicate cursive. Inside the envelope was a single sentence scribbled in faded blue ink. "What they told you was only half the story. Look in the study, behind the painting of the orchard." Victoria stood in front of the Hale estate's front door as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the graveled driveway. The envelope from Eleanor was tucked inside her coat, its weight growing heavier with every heartbeat. Behind the glass windows, the house loomed, quiet, old but far from still. It had witnessed decades of betrayal, ambition, and silence. But now it would speak. She entered slowly, every floorboard creaking beneath her heels like a hesitant confession. The study was at the back of the house, oak-paneled, warm with the scent of aged books and leather. The painting Eleanor had referenced hung directly above the fireplace, a serene orchard, watercolor soft, with a single woman seated beneath a cherry tree. For years, Victoria had assumed it was decorative. Now it felt like a message carved in pigment. She stepped onto the hearth, reached up, and gently took the frame down. Behind it, a small wooden panel with a brass keyhole. Her fingers trembled. She checked the envelope again. Taped to the back was a tiny, tarnished key. She fitted in and turned. With a soft click, the panel popped open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. Eleanor's handwriting labeled the first page, "For my granddaughter, the one they tried to erase." She sat down in Eleanor's old reading chair and began to read. The entry started years ago, long before Victoria's birth. They told a story of a young Eleanor Hale betrayed by her sister, silenced by family, and forced to give up a child. Victoria's mother, to preserve the Hale reputation. The journals documented how Eleanor had quietly tracked her daughter's life from afar, how she'd watched her granddaughter grow up without ever being allowed near. And then came the heartbreak, the revelation that Nathan and Margaret had discovered the truth and used it as leverage to cut Eleanor off from Victoria permanently. They'd known all along. They had never told Victoria because to them she was a threat to the empire they believed was rightfully theirs. By the final pages, Eleanor's tone changed. Stronger, more defiant. If you're reading this, it means you didn't back down. You didn't let them rewrite your bloodline. The Hale name was never about power. It was about resilience. I see you, Victoria, and I am proud of you. Victoria closed the notebook, tears threatening but not falling. There were no more doubts, no more missing pieces. The story was whole now. Jagged, brutal, but hers. That night, she returned to her apartment in Cambridge, alone but unburdened. Isabella had offered to stay over, but Victoria wanted the silence not as a void, but as a space to breathe. She took the pearl bracelet off, set it gently on the windowsill, and opened her laptop. A folder waited on her desktop, labeled Second Chances Foundation. She had filed the paperwork that morning. The organization would offer free legal support to women facing financial and emotional manipulation in domestic relationships. The first outreach center would be housed in the old Hale carriage house. Eleanor's house would no longer belong to ghosts. A week later, Victoria stood in front of a packed hall at a law and ethics conference in Boston. Jessica stood beside her, smiling proudly. Michael waited in the wings. Cameras clicked as Victoria approached the podium. "My name is Victoria Whitman," she began, her voice steady, "and for years I thought my story was just one of loss and betrayal. But it's more than that. It's a story about legacy, truth, and reclaiming your name when others try to steal it from you." Applause erupted. And yet, as she stepped off stage, a new envelope waited on her chair. No return address, no stamp, just her name. Again, this time typed. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single photo, black and white, grainy. A young Eleanor, seated beside a man Victoria didn't recognize. Tall, serious, eyes that looked too familiar. On the back, scribbled in ink, "He's alive. His name was never Nathan Whitman, and he's coming for watches." Thanks for watching Day of Revenge. If you love drama, secrets, and jaw-dropping twists, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories.